The flour sack split against the cobblestones, and the old woman went down with it, not hard, but enough that her bonnet slid sideways and her bare hand scraped the curb, and the orphan girl, who had no business in this part of the market, was the only soul who moved toward her instead of away. Clumsy old besom. The grocer's man stood in his doorway, thumbs hooked in his apron, watching the pale dust bloom around the woman's skirts. "That's 2 shillings of best flour you've spilled, and you'll pay for it before you pick yourself up off my step." Clara Hale did not think about the bread she would not buy now, or the rent she could not make, or the fact that her own boots had been mended twice with twine. She crossed the cobbles with her basket banging against her hip and went down on her knees beside the stranger, and the heat of the August stones came up through her thin skirts like a hand pressed flat against her shins. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Don't move yet. Let your breath come back first." The old woman's eyes found her. They were a sharp, surprising grey, clear as rinsed glass, and they did not look like the eyes of someone confused or frightened. They looked, for one strange beat, almost amused. "My breath," the woman said, "has not gone anywhere. It is my flour that appears to have deserted me." He shoved you. Clara had seen it. The grocer's man had swung a crate of cabbages out the door without looking, caught the woman square across the basket she carried, and sent her staggering. "I saw it. You didn't drop a thing. He knocked it from your hands." "She walked into my crate," the man said, "and the pair of you can settle your story between you, but one of you is paying for that flour." Clara stood. She was not tall, and she was not anyone, and the smell of warm cabbage and horse and split flour hung thick in the noon air. But she had spent 4 years learning how to keep her voice level when a thing was unjust, because in the house where she had been raised on charity, a raised voice was always the servant's voice, never the master's. "You will not have a penny from her," Clara said. "You'll be lucky if I don't fetch the constable to ask why a grown man is flinging crates into the street where old women walk." A small crowd had stopped the way crowds do, drawn by the smell of trouble. A woman in a straw bonnet murmured. A boy laughed. The grocer's man looked at Clara, at her twine-mended boots and her sun-faded gown the colour of weak tea, and his lip curled with the particular contempt of a man who has found someone poorer than himself to despise. "And who are you, then? Her lady's maid?" He laughed at his own joke. "Look at the state of you. You've not the price of a loaf between the two of you." That was true. That was the worst of it. It was perfectly true, and the crowd could see it was true, and Clara felt the old hot shame climb her throat the way it always did. But she had learned something else in the charity house. In the long years of being the girl whose parents had left her nothing but a name and a Bible, shame was a thing you could set down, if you chose to, and pick up the more useful thing instead. She chose anger. "No," she said. "I've not the price of a loaf. So I've nothing to lose by standing here all afternoon telling every customer who comes to your door exactly how you treat your elders. I've a great deal of time, sir, have you?" The grocer's man opened his mouth. "Leave it, Tom." A woman had appeared in the shop doorway behind him, broad and red-faced and wiping her hands. "For the love of peace, leave it. You did swing that crate like a fool. Come inside before she draws half the street." He went, but he spat first, a thin contemptuous sound against the cobbles, and the crowd, finding the trouble had gone flat, drifted off to its own errands. The straw-bonneted woman patted Clara's arm once, vaguely, as though approving of a play she had not paid to see, and then she too was gone, and the market closed over the moment like water. Clara knelt again. "There now," she said, gentler. "He's away. Let me help you up. Slowly. Mind, lean on me. I've more strength than I look." The old woman set a gloved hand. Clara noticed the glove was good kid leather, finer than anything she herself had ever worn, though the rest of the woman's dress was plain dark stuff, with no trimming at all. Set that hand on Clara's offered arm, and rose. She came up light. She came up straight. And when she was standing, She was a full head shorter than Clara, and yet somehow not small at all. And her clear grey eyes went over Clara's face with a frank, unhurried attention that would have been rude in anyone less old. "You have a temper," the woman observed. "I have a sense of what's fair," Clara said. "It only looks like a temper when there's no one to enforce it but me." The old woman laughed. It was a short, dry sound, surprised out of her, and it changed her whole face. "Well," she said. Well. She looked down at the wreck of her basket, the split flower, a crushed paper of tea, a small bundle of letters tied with thread that had fallen clear and stayed clean. "I appear to have lost my mourning. And my flower. And a measure of my dignity, which at my age I cannot well spare." "You kept your dignity entire." Clara crouched and gathered the letters, brushed a smear of dust from the topmost, and set the bundle carefully into the woman's hands. The thread was good silk thread, she noticed, and the seal on the folded paper beneath was red wax stamped with something. A crest, a bird, she couldn't tell. And she did not look closer, because it was not hers to look at. It was the flower that suffered, and flower can be bought again. Can it? The woman tucked the letters away inside her plain dark spencer, against her ribs, the gesture of a person who has carried important paper close before. "By you?" Clara flushed. "Not by me, no. I told you the truth. I haven't the price of it. But I've 2 hands, and I'm not far from where you're going, I'd wager, since you've come on foot. Let me carry your basket and see you home. The least I can do is keep you from being knocked down twice in one morning." "You're a stranger," the woman said. "I might be anyone. I might lead you down a dark stair and have you robbed." "You might." Clara took up the basket. The August sun beat white on the chalk-dusty street, and somewhere a cartwheel shrieked for grease, and the smell of the river came up warm and green over the rooftops. "But you won't, because you're the one who's been robbed this morning, and people who've just been treated badly don't generally turn round and do it to the next person. They remember too well how it felt." The old woman stood very still for a moment. The amusement had gone out of her face, and something else had come into it, a kind of arrested attention, as though Clara had said a thing she had not expected to hear in the open street from a girl in mended boots. "What is your name?" "Clara Hale." "And what are you, Clara Hale, that you have time to spend a whole afternoon shaming a grocer on behalf of a woman you have never met?" Clara settled the basket on her hip. "I'm nothing in particular," she said. "I was a governess until April. The family I served went to the continent and did not require me to follow. Since then I've done plain sewing for whoever will pay for it, and waited on a milliner 3 days a week, and tried to make 11 shillings stretch to cover what 15 would barely cover." She said it plainly, without self-pity, because self-pity was another thing she had learned to set down. "Today is not a sewing day. So my afternoon is my own to spend, and I'd rather spend it walking an old woman home than not." "You are not nothing in particular," the woman said. "But we shall let that lie for now. My house is in Mount Street. Can you walk so far?" Mount Street. Clara knew it by reputation only. The wide, pale houses of the great. The swept steps. The brass that someone polished every dawn, so that the quality need never see it dull. A plainly dressed old woman who had walked to a common market on foot did not live in Mount Street. She lived near it, perhaps, a housekeeper, Clara thought, or a retired companion, lodged in some respectable back room by a family that had not quite forgotten her. That would explain the good gloves and the plain gown both, cast-offs and remnants of a better-placed life. "I can walk to Mount Street," Clara said, "and past it if your legs give out. Come. Take my arm. The cobbles are wicked in this heat. They've a way of catching a heel." The woman took her arm. They went up out of the market together, the tall poor girl and the small plain woman who was not, Clara was certain, anything like as plain as she dressed, and the bells of a church somewhere east of them rang the half-hour into the thick, bright summer air. They had not gone 40 yards before the second insult found them. It came in the shape of a young lady, and a young lady she unmistakably was, in a walking dress of pale lilac muslin, with a deeper lilac ribbon under the bust, a parasol tilted just so against the sun, and the kind of bonnet that costs more than a governess earns in a quarter. She was beautiful. Clara registered it the way one registers a struck match, a quick, clean, undeniable brightness, dark ringlets, a flushed cream complexion, a small mouth made for small cruelties. She was perhaps 20, and she came along the pavement with two companions trailing behind her like ribbons behind a kite, and she did not trouble to move aside. Good heavens. The young lady stopped, blocking the narrow walk entire, and looked the old woman up and down with an expression of delicate horror. Have they begun letting the workhouse out to take the air? Madam, you are blocking the path of people who have somewhere to be. Then walk around me, the old woman said mildly, as people with somewhere to be have done since walking was invented. One of the trailing companions tittered. The young lady's chin came up. You will not part with me. Her voice rose, sweet and carrying, and two gentlemen across the street turned to look. She liked that they turned. Clara saw her feel it land. Do you know who my father is? I will not be lectured on a public street by a rag-and-bone creature who has plainly never owned a clean glove in her life. Her gloves, Clara said, are cleaner than your manners, and a good deal better made. It came out before she had decided to say it. The young lady's beautiful face swung round, and the full force of her attention struck Clara like cold water. I beg your pardon. You ought to. Clara's heart was going hard now. She could feel it in her wrists, in the hollow of her throat, because this was not a grocer's man. This was quality. This was someone whose displeasure could cost a milliner's assistant her 3 days a week with a single word in the right ear. She knew that. She knew it, and she could not stop. Because the old woman's hand had tightened on her arm, just slightly, and Clara would no more have left her to be savaged than she would have left a child in the road. This lady was knocked down in the market not 10 minutes since, and has borne it with more grace than you have shown crossing an empty street. If you must put yourself in someone's path, put yourself in mine. I've no reputation to lose, and a great deal less patience than I had this morning. The silence held for 1 beat. 2. A horse stamped. The river smell rolled over them, warm and green and indifferent. The young lady's two companions had gone very still, the way people do when they sense a scene about to become a story they will tell at dinner. You insolent creature, the young lady breathed. I shall have you whipped. You'll have me nothing, Clara said. I'm not yours to whip. That fashion went out of England before your bonnet did, and your bonnet, if you'll forgive me, is at least a season behind. It was a low blow, and an accurate one, and the gentleman across the street laughed. Actually laughed. One of them clapping the other on the shoulder, and the young lady's cream complexion went a blotched and ugly scarlet. For an instant she looked as though she might strike out with the parasol. Then she gathered her muslin skirts in one gloved fist, threw a final glittering look of pure venom at Clara, and swept around them with her chin so high she nearly walked into a lamp iron, her companions scrambling after. Clara let her breath out slowly. That, she said, was probably unwise. It was magnificent, the old woman said, and entirely unwise. And I should like to know your direction, so that I may write to you when you are dismissed from your milliners for it, which you very probably will be. Because that child's father is a baronet who buys a great many bonnets, and is exactly the sort of small, great man who would think it worth his while to ruin you for sport. She said all this in the same dry, level voice, but her grey eyes were bright. You did that knowing it might cost you everything you have. I haven't got everything, Clara said. I've got 11 shillings and a temper, and a pair of hands. The hands no one can take. The temper's no use to me if I only ever use it on grocers. She shifted the basket. And you'd have done the same. I can see you would. You were halfway to doing it yourself when she called you a rag-and-bone creature. I felt you start. I only got there first because I've had more recent practice at being looked at like that. The old woman did not answer for a moment. They had come to a corner, where the mean streets gave way to broader ones, where the houses grew taller and paler, and the windows multiplied, and the change in the air was almost physical. The smell of horse and offal thinning, the smell of watered window boxes and swept stone coming up to replace it. A liveried footman walking the other way touched his hat to no one and looked through them both. "You said you were a governess," the woman said at last. "Where? In whose house? It hardly matters now. A merchant's family in Bristol, the Pettifords. Good enough people. The children were dull and kind, and I was fond of them." Clara smiled a little, despite herself remembering. I taught the eldest girl her globes and her French, and how to tell a real kindness from a flattering one, which her mother thought a strange thing to teach, and which I thought the only thing worth teaching at all. Then, Mr. Pettiford's affairs took the family abroad, and a governess is an expense one leaves behind with the second-best furniture, and so here I am. "Here you are," the woman echoed, "carrying a stranger's basket up Mount Street in the heat, with no character and no prospect, and a baronet's daughter sharpening her knives behind you." She stopped walking. They had arrived. "And this is my house." Clara looked up. It was not a back room. It was not a lodging near the great houses. It was one of the great houses, pale stone 4 stories high, with a fanlight over a black door so glossy she could see the street bent and shining in it, with window boxes of white summer stocks watering the warm air with their scent, with a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head that some servant had polished, until it burned gold in the sun. 2 footmen stood at the foot of the steps in livery, the deep blue of a midnight sky, and when they saw the old woman in her plain dark gown they did not look through her. They came to attention as though a flag had been raised. "Your Grace," the elder one said, and bowed from the neck. We had begun to be uneasy. "You have been gone above 2 hours." Clara's hand opened. The basket would have fallen if the younger footman had not stepped smartly forward and caught it, and she barely noticed him take it, because the whole bright street had tilted very slightly on its axis, and the warm stone scent of the window boxes had become suddenly, impossibly loud. "Your Grace." She turned to the old woman, to the small plain woman with the good gloves and the dry voice, and the letters sealed in red wax tucked against her ribs, and found those clear grey eyes watching her with an expression that was not amusement now, and not surprise, but something closer to a decision being quietly made. "You did not know," the woman said. No, Clara's voice had gone to nothing. "No. Your Grace, you walked. To the market. On foot, with a basket, like. I thought you were a housekeeper. I called you an old woman. I took your arm. I told you to take mine, She stopped, appalled, the heat flooding her face. "Forgive me. I had no notion. I'd never have presumed." "You'd have done exactly as you did," the old woman said. "That is rather the point of it." She mounted the first step, and the footman drew back, and then she turned, one hand on the cool iron rail, and looked down at Clara from a small height that was suddenly an enormous one. "I am the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne. The flour was for the kitchen, since you wonder. I have a habit of going out plain on the days I cannot bear my own grandeur, which my son considers a dangerous eccentricity, and on which subject he is, this morning, proven entirely right. A flicker of the dry humour. He will be insufferable about it. Her son." Clara's mind, scrabbling for something solid, fastened on the word and on the deep blue livery, and on the lion knocker burning gold, and arrived, a half-second too late to stop her face from showing it, at the only fact that mattered. A Dowager Duchess had a son, and the son of a Dowager Duchess was a duke, and she, Clara Hale, governess of no character, 11 shillings, twice mended boots, had just spent a summer morning lecturing a duke's mother on the cobbles, and calling her an old woman to her face. "Oh," she said faintly. "Quite," said the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne. "Come inside, Clara Hale. You will take some tea, since you have earned it twice over, and refused it once already, and you will not argue with me, because I have had a trying morning, and I am too old to be argued with on my own doorstep by a girl I have decided to like." She did not wait for an answer. She went up the steps, and the great black door opened before she reached it, as though the house itself had been holding its breath for her. Besides, there is a person within whom I think you ought to meet, and whom, I suspect, it will do a very great deal of good to be met by you. And from somewhere beyond that glossy door, deeper in the cool stone hush of the house, a man's voice, low, even, edged with a tiredness that had nothing to do with the hour, said, "Mother, where in God's name have you been?" The hall swallowed the noise of the street the moment the great door swung to behind her. One instant Clara stood in the white blare of August, the cart shriek and the river stink, and the hot chalk dust. The next she stood on a floor of black and white marble cool as a churchyard, under a ceiling so high her breath seemed to go up into it, and not come back. Somewhere above, light fell through a stair window in a long amber bar, and a clock she could not see ticked with a slow brass patience, and the whole place smelled of beeswax and lilies, and the faint cold mineral smell of stone that the sun never reached. She had time to take in exactly that much before the owner of the tired voice came out of a doorway to her left, and the hall, large as it was, seemed at once a size too small for him. He was young. That was the first wrong thing. The thing that would not fit the voice. She had heard age in it, and weariness, and the flat command of a man used to being obeyed, and she had pictured someone grey. He was none of it. He was perhaps 8 and 20, broad through the shoulder in a way his dark coat could not disguise, and did not try to, with a jaw shadowed from a razor used too early, and eyes the same rinsed grey as his mother's. Though where hers were clear, his had a weather over them, a closed sky. He filled the doorway he came through. He came on into the hall and filled that too. Mother, his gaze went over the dowager, head to Plainham, with a swift practiced anxiety that told Clara this was not the first time he had counted his mother's fingers to be sure she had come home with all of them. 2 hours. Hartley sent a footman to the square. You said the kitchen garden. I said no such thing. I said I wanted air, and you, being 24 hours behind your own sleep, heard kitchen garden because it was tidier. The dowager drew off one good kid glove, finger by finger. I went to the market in Shepherd Street. I bought flour. The flour is presently distributed across a grocer's step, and I am returned to you whole, which is more than I deserve, and entirely owing to this young woman. So you will be civil to her before you are anything else. Only then did the Duke look at Clara. It was not a kind look. She had been looked at unkindly a great many times, by the lilac girl not 20 minutes since, by the grocer's man, by mistresses who counted the household spoons after a governess gave notice, and she knew the varieties of it, and this was a new one. It was not contempt. It was assessment. His grey eyes went over her faded gown, and her twine-mended boots, and the basket the footman still held, and she watched him do the sum she had watched 100 such men do, poor, plain-dressed, no character, alone, and arrive, as they always arrived, at the wrong total. Civil, the Duke repeated. Of course. He inclined his head a precise inch. You have my thanks, miss? Hale, Clara said. Clara Hale. And you've no cause to thank me. I'd have done the same for anyone. I didn't know who she was. No, he said. I don't imagine you did. And there it was, soft, even, perfectly courteous, and meaning, as plainly as if he had spelled it, and how convenient that you have found out now. It is a remarkable thing, how often my mother's small adventures end with her bringing home some deserving soul who happened to be passing. The kitchen could start a subscription list. The heat came up Clara's throat. Not shame this time, but its hotter cousin. She set it down. She had had a great deal of practice that morning. Your Grace, she said, I have a basket of nothing, and a temper I've already overspent today, and I'd as soon walk back into the heat as stand in your cool hall being measured for a thief. Your mother asked me to tea. I'll go without it gladly, and trouble none of you, if my going would ease your mind. Only say which you'd rather, and stop saying one while you mean the other. The hall went very quiet. The unseen clock ticked. One of the footmen, by the door, developed a sudden fascination with the middle distance. The Duke looked at her for a long moment, and something moved at the back of the closed sky eyes. Not warmth, nothing so generous, but a flicker of revision. The look of a man who has added a column twice and got a different answer the second time, and does not like to be wrong about figures. "My mother," he said at last, "is not in the habit of asking twice. You had better come up." The drawing room they brought her to looked over the square at the back, where a plane tree threw green shade across the glass, and the white summer stocks in the window boxes breathed their clove-sweet scent into the warm air whenever the casement stirred. There was a sofa, the color of pale honey, and a great deal of glass and gilt that Clara did not let herself look at directly, the way you do not look directly at the sun, and a low table where a maid was already setting out a tea service so thin the light came through the cups. Clara sat on the edge of the honey sofa with her spine very straight and her hands folded, and felt the marble cool of the hall give way to wool carpet under her ruined boots, and did not let her shoulders touch the cushion behind her, because a governess who forgot herself in a duchess's drawing room had nowhere softer to fall. "Sit back, child. The sofa will not bite you. It is far too well bred." The dowager had shed her plain spencer, and sat now in a winged chair by the cold hearth, and without the dark stuff over her shoulders she looked, if anything, more formidable, smaller, and brighter, and harder, like a coal that has burned down to its core. "Julian, sit, or go. But do not loom. You loom exactly as your father did, and it gave me the headache for 30 years. The Duke did not sit. He went to the window and stood against the green light, with his hands behind him, which was its own kind of looming, and Clara understood that he meant to hear every word, and that her tea was to be a species of examination. "You said you were a governess." He did not turn round. "Until April. With whom?" "The Pettifords, of Bristol, merchants. The family went to Antwerp in the spring, and left their governess behind with the spare furniture." Clara took the cup the maid offered, and held it without drinking. The steam rose against her chin, smelling of bergamot and something darker, costlier, that she had no name for. "I gave Mrs. Pettiford no cause to write me anything but a fair character. She did not write me one at all, fair or otherwise, because she forgot, and they are gone, and so I have a great gap where my 4 years ought to be. Convenient." "Wretched," Clara said. "There is nothing convenient about a governess with no character, Your Grace. It is the difference between a respectable house and the gutter, and I have spent every week since April clinging to the lip of it by my fingernails. If I meant to invent a past for myself, I should have invented a better one. A vicar for a father, say, and a cousin who is a canon at Wells. I'd have invented a reference. The fact that I haven't one ought to argue I'm honest if you'd let it." That turned him. He came round from the window, and the grey weather in his eyes had a crack of something else in it now, quickly closed. "It argues," he said, "that you are clever enough to know exactly how an honest woman would sound. Julian, it is a fair point, mother, and you raised me to make fair ones." He set his own cup down untouched on the mantel. "You walk out alone, against every promise you have made me since the spring. A young woman of no fixed situation comes to your aid in the precise public manner most likely to be remembered, defends you a second time before witnesses who will repeat it, and walks you to your own door, where, astonished, no doubt, she discovers a duchess. And within the half-hour she is drinking my tea." His voice never rose. That was the worst of it. Clara would have known better what to do with shouting. "I have spent 11 months keeping the wolves from this house, Miss Hale. You will forgive me if I have learned to know the look of a clever wolf with good manners and a sad story." Clara set her cup down on the thin saucer with a click that sounded very loud. 11 months, she said. "Since your father," she stopped. She did not have the word and would not have used it. "Since you came into the title." He said nothing, which was a yes. "Then I'm sorry for it." She said it plainly, the way she said everything. Truly, it is a hard thing to be left holding a great house and everyone in it before you've had your sleep out. I had a smaller version of it once, and it near broke me. and mine came with no wolves at all, only loneliness, which is cheaper, but lasts longer. She rose. Her knees were not quite steady, but her voice was. But you've made a mistake in your sums, and I'll tell you where. A wolf, your grace, would have known the gloves. Any creature out to snare a duchess would have marked good kid leather at 40 paces and curtsied to it. I didn't. I called your mother an old woman and told her to take my arm and thought her a discarded housekeeper who'd come down in the world. And if you think a wolf clever enough to invent a character would be fool enough to miss the gloves, then you have not, in 11 months, met a single wolf worth the name. The silence after that had a different quality. The plane tree stirred at the window and threw its shifting coins of green light across the carpet, and from somewhere below in the great house a door closed, and a girl's footsteps went quick along a flag, and the clove smell of the stocks rolled in warm and faded again. The Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne began, softly, to laugh. "Oh, sit down, both of you," she said, "before one of you says something that cannot be mended. Clara, sit, Julian, for the love of your late grandmother, who would have liked this girl enormously, and told you so at twice the volume. Give over playing the magistrate. You are very bad at it. You have your father's face for cards, and it shows every card you hold." The Duke looked at his mother. Then, for the first time, the corner of his hard mouth moved. Not a smile, nothing so spendthrift, but the ghost of where a smile would go if he ever permitted himself the expense of one. "You are determined to keep her," he said. "I am determined to give her tea, which she has now twice failed to drink, and to discover whether the only person in London this summer with the wit to tell that baronet's odious daughter the truth about her bonnet can also tell a French verb from a German one. Beyond that I am determined on nothing whatsoever." The dowager's grey eyes were bright as struck flint. "Though I will say, Julian, that for a man who has spent 11 months complaining there is no one in this house under 60 who dares contradict him, you took remarkably ill to being contradicted just now. One might almost think it had done you good." This time, the thing at the corner of his mouth very nearly arrived. "I find," the Duke said dryly, "that being instructed in wolves by a young woman in twine boots is a novelty the season has somehow failed to provide me. I shall write to Almack's. They are forever short of novelties." It was so unexpected, the dust-dry turn of it, the weariness lifting half an inch to let it through, that Clara laughed before she could stop herself, a short, startled sound, and saw his eyes come to her face at the noise, as though he had surprised himself as much as her, and wished to know who had heard it. For one beat they only looked at one another, the Duke and the governess of no character, and the green light moved over them both, and Clara felt the floor of the afternoon shift very slightly beneath her, like the cobbles had shifted that morning, when the whole bright street tilted on its axis. Then a footman scratched at the door, and the moment closed over like water. "Beg pardon, Your Grace." The man came in with a salver, and on the salver a single card, and his face had the careful blankness of a servant carrying news he knows will not be welcome. "Sir Harford Vane. He is below, and his daughter with him. He says he is expected." The Duke's face shut like the great black door downstairs. "He is not expected," he said. "No, Your Grace. But he says the matter of the Hartley letters will not keep, and that you gave your word to her ladyship your mother to hear him on it before the month was out, and the month is out tomorrow." Yes, the Duke's hand had gone flat against the cold marble of the mantel, and Clara, who read hands the way other people read faces, saw the knuckles whiten there, and then, deliberately ease. "Show him into the library. I will come down." The footman bowed and withdrew, and the dowager set down her cup with a care that was its own kind of violence, and the warmth had gone clean out of the room as though a window had been opened on a colder season. "Vane," she said. "On a Tuesday, with the girl in tow, he grows bold. He grows certain," the Duke said. "There is a difference, and it is not in our favor." He was already moving for the door, already gone in his mind to the cold room below and the colder business in it, and Clara saw the 11 months come down over him again, like a visor coming down, the young face setting into the older one the voice had promised. "Mother, keep Miss Hale up here. I want no, But Clara had risen when the name was spoken, because the name had gone through her like cold water down the spine, and she heard her own voice say, into the genteel hush, the thing that could not now be unsaid. Vane. Her mouth was dry. Sir Harford Vane, a baronet, with a daughter, about 20, dark ringlets, a lilac walking dress, and a parasol, and a small mouth, and 2 friends behind her like ribbons on a kite. The Duke stopped in the doorway. He turned. The grey weather in his eyes had gone perfectly still, the stillness of deep water, with something moving far down in it. "You are describing Miss Augusta Vane," he said slowly. "Sir Harford's only daughter. A beat. How do you come to describe her so exactly, Miss Hale?" And Clara stood in the beautiful cooling room, with the green light moving over the honey sofa, and the thin cups going cold, and the whole vast house listening, and understood, a half-second too late, exactly as she had understood it that morning on the doorstep, that the magnificent, unwise thing she had done in the street had not been left behind in the street at all. It had come up Mount Street ahead of her. It was sitting, this minute, in the library below, in pale lilac muslin, beside a father who had come to press a duke on a matter of letters sealed in red wax, and it was about to learn that the rag-and-bone creature who had shamed it before 2 laughing gentlemen was, by some impossible turn of the August afternoon, drinking that very duke's tea 2 floors above its head. "Because," Clara said, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to, "she is the 2nd person I insulted in the street this morning on your mother's behalf. And I'd do it again. But I think, Your Grace, that I have just made your difficult month a very great deal worse, and I think you had better tell me, before you go down those stairs, exactly what is in those letters, because I am about to be standing in the middle of it, whether any of us wishes it or no." The Duke did not answer at once. He stood in the doorway with one hand on the jamb, and Clara watched the calculation move behind his eyes, the same swift weighing she had felt him do in the hall, only turned now upon a larger sum than a governess in mended boots. From below came the small sounds of a great house receiving someone it did not want, a door opening, a murmur of liveried voices, the scrape of a chair drawn out in a room not yet warmed for company. "Mother," he said, "tell me you did not." "I did exactly what I said I would do." The dowager's hands had gone still in her lap, and the brightness in her grey eyes had cooled to something flat and old. "I went and I asked, and I came away with them. They are sewn into the lining of my spencer this minute, which is hanging over the back of that chair, and if you raise your voice, I shall sit on it." Clara looked from one to the other. "The letters," she said. "The ones I picked up off the cobbles. Tied with silk thread, sealed in red wax, there was a bird stamped in it. I thought it a wren. I didn't look close. It wasn't mine to look at. It was a martlet," the Duke said. His voice had gone very quiet. "A footless bird. It is the Ashbourne crest, Miss Hale. It has sat on the gate of this house for 200 years, and on every letter my father ever set his hand to, and it is presently sitting in a sealed packet against my mother's ribs, because she has spent the morning walking the worst streets in London alone to fetch it home before Sir Harford Vane could buy it out from under us. Sit down, Julian. You are frightening the girl, and she has had quite enough frightening for one Tuesday." "I am not frightened," Clara said, though her hands were not perfectly steady on the cold thin cup. "I am 2 floors above a man I insulted in the street, and his daughter. And I have just learned that the basket I carried up Mount Street had your family's honour folded inside it. I should rather know the whole of it standing than learn it by halves from behind a door." For a moment the only sound was the plane tree turning its leaves at the window and the slow brass patience of the unseen clock. Then the Duke came back into the room and shut the door behind him with a soft and final click, and the green light lay across his hard young face and did not soften it at all. "Then you shall have it whole," he said, "since my mother has already decided you are to be trusted with the family's throat, and I have learned in 11 months that arguing with her is a way of spending an afternoon I do not have." He set his hands behind him. My father borrowed money. A great deal of it. In his last year, more than the estate could carry, and more than he ever told me. Though I have spent these 11 months finding the bottom of it, one creditor at a time, the way a man counts stairs in the dark with his foot. The largest sum he had of Sir Harford Vane. A baronet lending to a duke, Clara said. It's usually the other way about. It is. Vane is new money, and knew it. And lending up is how new money buys what it cannot otherwise purchase. The corner of his mouth twisted. No humor in it now. My father gave him security. Not the estate. He could not pledge what was entailed. He pledged the one unentailed thing he had left to give. He paused. He pledged me. Clara set the cup down. The small click of porcelain on porcelain seemed enormous in the still room. He set his hand to a paper. The Duke went on, evenly, as a man reads out a butcher's bill, naming Miss Augusta Vane as the intended bride of his son and heir, the marriage to bind the two houses, and to discharge the debt by the joining of them. He wrote it. He signed it. He sealed it with the martlet, in his own hand, 3 months before I came into the title, and Sir Harford Vane has held it ever since against the day he chose to come up Mount Street on a Tuesday and lay it on my library table. The clove scent of the stocks rolled in warm through the casement, and faded, and Clara found she had risen from the honey sofa without deciding to, the way she had risen on the doorstep, the way she had crossed the cobbles that morning toward a stranger going down. "You never gave your word," she said. "I was not asked for it. That is the beauty of the thing, from Vane's side. A father may dispose of a son in this country as he disposes of a horse, and the son's opinion is taken at the wedding, and not before." The Duke's knuckles, behind him, had gone white again. "If I refuse, he publishes. He puts my father's hand and seal before every man at every club between St. James's and the city. And then the world learns that the late Duke of Ashbourne sold his heir to a coal money baronet to cover his losses, and my mother, who buried a husband she had stopped being able to honor long before she lost him, is made to stand in the wreck of his name for whatever years are left her. That is what is in the Hartley letters, Miss Hale. Hartley was the attorney who drew the cursed thing. He is the man my mother went to this morning, in disguise, on foot, to buy back the proofs before Vane's people could. And did you?" Clara turned to the Dowager. "Buy them back?" "I bought back my husband's later letters," the Dowager said. "The ones he wrote to Hartley in the spring before he was gone, when his conscience finally caught up with his arithmetic. Letters saying he repented of the bargain, that he would find another way to pay Vane, that his son should marry where his son chose, or not at all. They are real. They are in his hand. They are sewn into my Spencer." She let out a slow breath. "But they are letters of intention. Child. Not instruments of law. A signed and sealed settlement on one side, a dead man's regret on the other. Any court would weigh them and find the regret light." Her mouth thinned. "What they are good for is shame. Vane fears shame more than he fears the law, because shame is the one coin his money cannot buy back. If the world learns the late Duke recanted, it learns Vane held a gentleman to a promise the gentleman had repudiated in writing, and that is a thing the new-made baronet, climbing so carefully, cannot afford to have said of him at his own dinner table. That is our whole defense. A handful of paper, and a man's vanity." Clara stood in the middle of the beautiful room with the green light moving over her ruined boots, and understood at last the weight of what the morning had set in motion. "And I," she said slowly, "have just stood in the public street and called that man's only daughter a rag and bone. No, I called her bonnet a season behind, and her manners worse than an old woman's gloves, and I made 2 gentlemen laugh at her where the whole pavement could hear it." The heat came up her throat, and she let it come. There was no setting it down now. "You are about to go below and bargain with a man for your mother's good name and your own freedom. And you must do it gently, carefully, giving away as little as you can. And the one card you cannot afford to be holding is a quarrel with his daughter's pride. And I have put that card in your hand this very hour." The Duke looked at her, and for once there was nothing of the magistrate in it. "Yes," he said simply. "You have. Then send me away." Clara crossed to the chair where the Dowager's plain Spencer hung, and stopped herself short of touching it, as though the letters inside might burn. Now, this minute, before he hears my name. Put me out the garden door into the mews, and let me go back into the heat and be nobody, and tell him. Tell him whatever you must. He need never know the girl who shamed Augusta in Shepherd Street is the same who carried your mother home. Two creatures in twine boots are alike to a man like that. He'll not connect them if no one connects them for him. And leave you to walk back to your 11 shillings with a baronet's daughter already vowing to ruin you? The dowager had not raised her voice, but something in it had gone iron. You think I do not know what becomes of a governess, with no character and a great man's enmity? I have watched it happen to better-placed women than you, Clara Hale, for smaller sins than telling a fool the truth. No, you will not be put out the mews door like a cat. Mother. The Duke's voice was low and urgent now. The warmth burned clean off it. Be reasonable for 1/4 of 1 hour. Vane is below with the very paper that can break us, and he has come bold, on a day not appointed, with the girl on his arm, which means he means to press, and press hard. And the only question worth asking is what he will take to go away quiet. I cannot fight that battle and shield a stranger in the same breath. She is right. Let her go. It should not have wounded. He was speaking sense. She had spoken it herself not 10 seconds before. She had offered him the mews door with her own mouth. And yet to hear him take it up so swiftly, so coolly, let her go. 2 words, as a man sets down a parcel he is tired of carrying, went into Clara somewhere beneath the place where pride lived, into the older and softer place she had spent 4 charity house years learning to keep covered. Of course, she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that, after. Of course, Your Grace. You're quite right. I'll trouble you no further. She had her hand on the door to the landing, the wrong door, the one that gave onto the stair down which Vane had been shown not 3 minutes since, before either of them moved. And she opened it on a hall full of the cool stone hush of the house, and on the unmistakable sound, rising clear up the well of the great staircase, of a sweet and carrying young voice. And I tell you, Papa, the impertinence of the creature. In broad day. She put herself in my path and called me. I shan't repeat what she called me. It does not bear repeating before gentlemen. And 2 persons across the way laughed, Papa. Men of some appearance. They laughed at me in the open street. And if the Duke means to make any sort of cousin of me, he had best understand that I will not be laughed at in his city. I will not bear it. I will know the creature's name before I am a day older. Clara stood frozen in the open doorway, with the voice pouring up the stairwell. And behind her, she heard the Duke come to his feet, and the Dowager's quick, indrawn breath. And the whole afternoon hung for one long beat on the turning point of a single closed door. Then a man's voice answered the girl's, heavier, slower, pleased with itself, the voice of a man who has bought his way into a room and means to stay in it. You shall have her name, my dear, and her direction, and a great deal more besides. There is nothing in this town that money will not fetch up, given a morning. A pause, and the creak of a chair taking a heavy man's weight. Though I'd not fret over a market scold when there are larger fish on the table. His Grace is a long time coming down. Ring again. The Duke was beside her then, his hand flat on the door above her head, easing it, too late, toward its frame. And Clara turned her face up to his in the green shadowed gloom of the landing, and saw in his closed sky eyes, the precise instant he understood, that the voice below had carried up, exactly as far as the voices above had carried down, and that there was no longer any garden door in England wide enough to make her nobody. He heard nothing, the Duke said very quietly. Names carry down a stairwell, not up. He does not know you are here. He will, Clara said, the second I am seen.
The second a footman who watched me come in carries down a tray and gossips with the man who watched me go out. You cannot keep a thing like that in a house with 40 servants, and a girl below who has sworn to learn my name before nightfall. You may hide me an hour. You cannot hide me through a betrothal." The word landed in the cool air between them, and lay there, ugly and bare. The Duke shut the door. He stood with his back against it, and his hand still on the latch, and for a moment, one only, the 11 months and the great house and the cold business below all seemed to press down on his broad shoulders at once. And Clara saw, beneath the magistrate and beneath the Duke, the tired young man who had heard a footman sent to the square to count whether his mother had come home whole. "No," he said, "I cannot hide you through a betrothal." He pushed off the door. "So I had better go and prevent the betrothal. Mother, keep her here. Truly this time, whatever you hear, however long I am gone, keep her in this room, and keep that Spencer on your back, and do not, on your life, let either come down those stairs until I send." He was gone before Clara could answer, the door drawn quietly to behind him, and his tread went down the great staircase unhurried, and even, a duke's tread, giving nothing away. And then, a door closed somewhere below, and the house held its breath. The dowager rose from the winged chair and crossed to the window, and stood looking down into the square, where the plane tree threw its shade, with her plain dark gown making her, against all that glass and gilt, look like a small black stone set in a brooch too rich for it. "He is doing it wrong," she said to the glass. "He will go down there cold and careful, and give Vane nothing, and Vane will smile and take it, as a man takes a hand of cards he means to lose tonight and win tomorrow. My son thinks a thing can be managed if one is only patient enough and clever enough and gives away little enough." She turned. The grey eyes found Clara. He learned that from watching his father manage things, and his father managed this family straight into a coal merchant's pocket. Patience is not always the virtue, child. Sometimes the virtue is to throw the whole table over while your enemy is still admiring his cards. "You want him to refuse outright," Clara said. "Publish your husband's letters first, before Vane can publish the settlement. Shame Vane, before Vane shames you. I want a great many things I am too old and too well bred to do myself." The dowager came back across the room, and there was a colour in her face now that had not been there over the tea. "You are not too old. And you have already shown me, twice today, that you are not overburdened with the kind of breeding that keeps a woman silent when a thing is unjust." She stopped before Clara and looked up at her, that frank, unhurried attention that had unnerved her in the street. "Tell me the truth, Clara Hale. Below us is a girl who will ruin you for sport, and a father who can ruin you in earnest, and a man who has just told you to your face that he cannot afford you. Why is your colour up? Why are you standing as though you mean to go through that door and not out of it? You owe this house nothing. You carried my basket, and you have been called a wolf for your trouble. A wise girl would take the mews door my son was too proud to use and run." Clara was quiet a moment. Below, very faintly, she could hear the rise and fall of voices in the library, the heavy pleased one, the even careful one, the sweet sharp one cutting across them both, and could make out no words, only the shape of the thing, like weather heard through a wall. "Because he's losing," she said at last. "I can hear it. He's down there being a duke, and a duke is exactly the wrong thing to be against a man who's bought one. You're right, he gives away too little, and so he gives away the whole game. Because Vane has nothing to fear from a careful man." She drew a breath. "And because that girl is going to spend the next hour pressing her father to want me ruined, and her father is going to discover, the moment he's bored of the letters, that ruining me is a small cheap pleasure he can hand his daughter to make the larger bargain sweeter. I am about to be a gift, Your Grace. A thing thrown in, and I have spent my whole life being the thing thrown in, the governess left with the spare furniture, the orphan kept on charity, the girl whose price was always low enough to be generous with. I am very tired of it." Her voice did not shake. "If I am to be in the middle of this, then I will be in the middle of it standing up.
where I can at least see the blow coming, not folded into a corner of this lovely room waiting to hear what's been decided about me. The dowager looked at her for a long moment. Then she crossed to the chair, took up the plain dark Spencer, and from a seam in its lining drew a small flat packet of letters tied with silk thread, sealed in red wax, stamped with a footless bird, and held it out. "Then go down," she said, "and take these. He told me to keep them on my back, and you in this room. He is my son, and I have disobeyed better men than him for worse reasons." Her hand did not waver. "But understand what you carry. If you put these into Vane's bargaining, you put my husband's repentance into the open air, and once a thing is in the open air, it cannot be folded back into a Spencer. There is no taking it home a second time. Whatever happens after, happens because you carried it down those stairs." Clara looked at the packet. The red seal had a thumbnail of grime worked into it from the market cobbles. Her grime, from her hand, that morning. The same letters. The whole circle of the day closing. "You hardly know me," she said. "I know you better after one morning than I know most of the people who have dined at my table for 20 years. The dowager pressed the packet into her hands and folded Clara's fingers over it with both of her own, the kids soft and the work rough together. "Now, down," and Clara, her grey eyes glittered, hard and bright, and entirely unfrightened. "When you go into that room, do not be the governess. Be the woman who told a baronet's daughter her bonnet was a season behind. Vane has spent his life among people who are afraid of him. He will not know what to do with one who is not." The library was the cold room the rest of the warm house wrapped itself around, north-facing, shelved to the ceiling, the summer kept out by drawn half-shutters, so that the air in it was dim and stone-cool, and smelled of old leather and ink, and the dry dust of paper that no one read. A long table of dark wood ran down the middle of it, and along that table the afternoon had arranged itself like a tableau staged for her arrival. Sir Harford Vane planted in a chair at the near end, broad and florid in a coat too new, and a waistcoat too bright, with a single folded paper lying before him under his flat hand, Augusta beside him in her pale lilac, parasol furled, her small mouth set in the satisfied curve of a girl certain of her ground, and the Duke standing at the far end of the table, with the half-light across him, holding the whole length of polished wood between himself and his guests like a man keeping a river at his back. He saw Clara in the doorway. She watched the warning leap into his face, "I told you to stay above," and watched him kill it, all in the space of a held breath, because to show it before Vane was to give Vane a thread to pull. "Miss Hale," he said. Cool, even, giving nothing. "I asked that you not be disturbed." "You did, Your Grace." "I disturbed myself." Clara came into the cold room with the packet held flat against her side, where the half-light would not catch it, and made her curtsy to the table at large, neat and exact, the curtsy of a governess, who has dropped 1,000 of them. "I find I cannot take a family's tea while a quarrel I began in the street is being settled 2 floors below without me. It seemed cowardly. I have been a great many low things in my life, but I have tried not to add cowardly to the account." Sir Harford Vane turned in his chair, his eyes small, shrewd, set in a heavy face that had once been handsome, and was handsome yet, in the beautiful but coarse way of a man who has eaten and drunk his fill of everything money could fetch, went over her without recognition, the way such men's eyes always went over the poorly dressed, a quick dismissal, a thing checked off and discarded. But Augusta knew her at once. The girl came half out of her chair, and the cream went out of her complexion, and the blotched scarlet came up in its place exactly as it had on the pavement, and her gloved hand flew to the table, as though to steady the whole tilting world. "You." The word came out of her in a hiss. "Papa, Papa, it is she. It is the creature from the street. The one I told you of. The one who, Papa, she is in the Duke's house. She is, how does she come to be here? Augusta." Sir Harford had not moved, but his attention had sharpened all at once, swinging from his daughter to Clara, and from Clara to the Duke at the head of the table, and Clara watched the shrewdness in his heavy face begin, with horrible quickness, to do its arithmetic. Compose yourself. You are telling me that this person is the same who used you ill this morning in Shepherd Street. The very same. In a lilac, no. I wore the lilac. She wore that rag she stands in now. She insulted me before gentlemen. She said my manners were, and now she walks into His Grace's library bold as a... Papa, what does it mean? It means, said Sir Harford Vane slowly, and a smile began to spread across his heavy, handsome face like grease spreading on cold water, that His Grace keeps interesting company. And that the morning has handed me, all unlooked for, a great deal more than I came up these steps to fetch. He sat back. The chair creaked. He laid his second hand over the first upon the folded paper, comfortable, unhurried, a man who has just understood that he holds even more than he knew. Well, Your Grace, you will perhaps explain to me what a creature who abuses my daughter in the public street is doing, taking her ease beneath your roof, before we return to the smaller matter of your late father's hand and seal. The Duke's face had shut entirely. Miss Hale rendered my mother a service this morning. She is the Dowager Duchess's guest. That is the whole of it, and it is none of your affair, Vane, is it not? Sir Harford's smile did not waver. A penniless nobody, for she is penniless, one has only to look, who insults my Augusta in the morning and dines with your mother by noon. And you would have me think it chance. He turned the folded paper over once, idly, under his fat fingers, and Clara saw the Duke's eyes follow it the way a man watches a blade in another man's hand. I think not, Your Grace. I think your house is in more disorder than even I had supposed. And a man does well to know the full disorder of a house before he ties his only daughter to it. Papa, I do not want. I will not have her under the same roof. I will not be a cousin to a house where that creature is welcomed. You must make him turn her out. You must make him, hush, child, I am thinking. And the dreadful thing, Clara saw, the thing that turned the cold room colder, was that he meant it kindly. He patted his daughter's gloved hand as he said it, fond and easy, a doting father quieting a fretful girl, and went on thinking of how best to use her temper to screw one more turn out of the man at the end of the table. There is a way, Sir Harford said, in which this little vulgarity of the morning may be mended to everyone's satisfaction. Your Grace honours my father's settlement. The marriage is announced before the month is out, tomorrow being the month's end. The timing is Providence itself, and as a small token of good faith between our houses, the guest who used my daughter ill is dismissed from your protection this hour, and a line written to whatever shop or family she next applies to, that she is not a person to be trusted. He spread his hands, magnanimous. There, the honour of both houses served, my daughter satisfied, and your father's name kept out of every club window in London. I am not an unreasonable man, Ashbourne. I ask only what was promised, and one small creature thrown in to sweeten my girl's temper, which is no more than she is owed. So there it was, spoken plain, across the polished table, in the dim leather-smelling cold, Clara Hale, thrown in. The thing added to the bargain, exactly as she had said it would be, standing in the green-lit drawing-room not a quarter-hour since, and knowing it would come had not, she found, armoured her against the hearing of it at all. She looked at the Duke. He was very still. The half-light lay along his hard young jaw and his closed grey eyes, and his hand was flat on the dark wood, and Clara watched him weigh it, watched him truly weigh it, because he was a man who had spent 11 months learning to give away as little as he could, and here was a way to give away only her. One penniless governess of no character, no kin, no claim. A stranger of a single morning. Against his mother's name, his father's honour, his own freedom from a girl he did not want. Against all of that, only Clara, only the thing thrown in. The arithmetic was not even close. She could see it not being close. She had done that sum herself 100 times from the wrong side of it, in 100 houses, and she knew to the penny what a girl like her was worth when she was set against a family's good name. Your Grace, Clara said quietly, to spare him the saying of it. It is a fair price. repay it. I am only the morning's accident. I'll go, and I'll go quiet, and no line need be written, because I'll never trouble a house this high again as long as I live." She made her curtsy. Her hands were steady. "Your mother was kind to me, kinder than I've any right to remember, and that is more than enough for one day. Sir Harford, your daughter's bonnet, on reflection, was very fine." I spoke from temper. "Good afternoon to you all." She turned for the door. "Miss Hale," the Duke's voice. She stopped, her hand already lifting to the latch, and did not turn round, because she had spent the morning learning that there were some blows a person took better with their back to the room. "You will not go," he said. She turned then. The whole table had turned with her, Augusta's small mouth fallen open, Sir Harford's heavy brows drawn down, the magnanimous grease of his smile beginning to congeal. The Duke had come away from the head of the table. He stood square in the dim cold light, with his hands no longer behind him, and the 11 months had gone out of his face, and what had come into it instead was something Clara had not seen there before, and could not at once name, not warmth, not yet, but the hard, clean look of a man who has thrown over a careful course and found, in the wreck of it, that he can breathe. "Ashbourne," Sir Harford's voice had lost its ease. "Have a care. You are about to be a fool over a market girl, and I am holding your father's seal." "You are holding my father's worst hour," the Duke said, "set against which vein I find I would rather keep a bad morning's accident than buy your silence with her. I have spent 11 months trying to manage you. I have just understood, watching you offer to mend your daughter's pride with another woman's livelihood, that you cannot be managed. You can only be paid, forever, in larger and larger coin, and a man who pays such a creditor once pays him to the end of his days." His grey eyes went to Clara, one flick, and back. "No, take your paper, and publish it, and be damned to you. The money my father had of you, you shall have back to the last farthing, honestly, and in its own time, as he swore in his own hand he would repay it, marriage or no marriage. But I would sooner have the world know my father erred than become the kind of man who would let you teach my mother's guest what her dismissal is worth as a sweetener in your tea." The cold room rang with the silence after it. Sir Harford rose. He rose slowly, the florid colour mounting in his heavy face, and he took up the folded paper from the table and held it up between two fat fingers so that the failing half-light caught the red wax on its fold. "You young fool," he said softly. "You do not even know what you have refused. This is not the settlement, Ashbourne. This is a copy. The settlement, your father's own hand, his seal, the thing that breaks you, is lodged where neither your mother's morning walks nor your fine speeches can reach it. And tomorrow at this hour, unless I have your word given before witnesses, it goes into hands that will see it read aloud in every coffee-house from here to Cornhill by Friday." He let the copy fall. It drifted to the dark table and lay there, harmless, a lure shown and withdrawn. "You think you have found your courage. You have only found the depth of your ignorance. You have until tomorrow's end. Augusta, we are leaving. Wait in the hall." "Papa, Papa, you cannot let her." The hall, Augusta, the girl went, in a furious rustle of lilac, and at the door she turned and threw Clara a look of such pure and undiluted hatred that it was almost, in its completeness, magnificent. And then she was gone, her quick light step ringing away across the marble. Sir Harford gathered his hat from the table. At the door he paused and turned, and his small, shrewd eyes went one last time over the three of them. The Duke, and the old woman who had come quietly to stand in the doorway behind Clara, and Clara herself, with the secret packet, still pressed flat and unseen against her side. "Tomorrow," he said. "And Ashbourne, I shall inquire in the meantime, very particularly, into Miss Hale. A governess with no character and no people is a thin sort of person to break a great alliance over. It would grieve me to learn there was anything in her history that a careful man might find useful. But I am a careful man. He inclined his head, all courtesy now. The threat folded back inside the manners, like a knife back into its sheath. Good afternoon. And he was gone, and his heavy tread went down through the cool house, and the great black door opened far below, and shut with a sound that came up the stairwell soft as a closing book. For a long moment no one in the cold library moved. The dust hung in the slatted light. Somewhere a clock ticked its slow brass patience. Then the Duke let out a breath that seemed to take half his height with it, and put one hand flat on the dark table, as though the room had tilted, and looked across it at Clara with the closed sky gone clean out of his eyes. I have just, he said, with the ghost of the dust-dry voice from the drawing room, only shaken now, thrown the whole table over while my enemy was still admiring his cards. I am told it is sometimes the virtue. He looked at his mother. You heard. I heard. The dowager came into the room. It was the first wholly right thing I have watched you do since they put your father in the ground, and it has cost us everything, and I have never in my life been prouder of a piece of ruin. Her grey eyes went to Clara, sharp and bright. Show him. He has earned the sight of it now. And Clara, in the dim cold room that smelled of leather and dust and the long-shut summer, drew out from against her side the flat packet of letters tied with silk thread, sealed in red wax stamped with a footless bird, and laid it on the dark table between herself and the Duke of Ashbourne. Her own market grime still worked into the seal, the whole circle of the impossible day come round at last to its turning, and said, in a voice that had at last begun, very slightly, to shake, there is the original settlement somewhere we cannot reach, but these are your father's letters of repentance, in his own hand, and I have just spent the afternoon learning exactly what kind of man Sir Harford Vane fears being thought. He is afraid of shame, Your Grace. You said it yourself, upstairs. She set her hand flat on the packet. So before he can read his paper aloud in every coffee house in London, we are going to teach the whole of the ton to read yours first. And I think, between your mother's name and my temper, and a single night to do it in, we may yet beat a careful man to the open air. But you had better decide tonight, both of you. Because once these go out, there is no folding them back into a Spencer, and no taking any of it home again. The Duke did not reach for the packet. He stood over it with both hands flat on the dark table, the half-light sliding along his knuckles, and looked at the footless bird stamped in the red wax, as though it might lift off the paper and fly. You understand what you are proposing, he said at last. You are proposing that I take my father's shame out of Vane's hands and carry it into the open street myself, that I tell the world the thing I have spent 11 months keeping the world from learning. No, Clara kept her hand on the letters. The leather and dust cold of the room had got into her fingers, and the silk thread was warm by contrast, where her thumb crossed it. I am proposing you tell them the second half of the thing first. Vane means to say the late Duke sold his son. We will have said, a day before him, the late Duke saw his error and repented of it in his own hand. The same fact, Your Grace. Read in the other order. A man who buys back his honor while there is breath in him is not a man the ton scorns. He is a man they forgive over their cards, and pity a little, and like the better for the mending of it. She drew a slow breath. It is only the order that ruins or saves you. And the order is ours to choose for one more night. The dowager, by the cold hearth, made a low sound that was almost a laugh. There, she said. There it is. I have been trying to make my son hear that sentence in a dozen shapes since April, and a governess says it once over a tea he would not let her drink. She came forward into the slatted light, and the brightness was back in her grey eyes. Julian, she is right, and you know she is right, and the only thing standing in the road is your pride, which has cost this family quite enough already. For a long moment the clock filled the room with its slow brass patience. Then the Duke straightened, and Clara watched the 11 months go off his shoulders the way a wet coat comes off, all at once, with a kind of shudder. Tell me how, he said, not the why. I have the why. Tell me the how, because I have never in my life done a thing this public on purpose, and you appear to have been born knowing it. They worked by candlelight when the candlelight came, the three of them around the long table, and the cold library warmed slowly with their breath and the small flame smell of the branch of wax the footman brought and set between them without a word. Clara had a sheet of the late Duke's letters open under her hand, the ink browned at the edges, the hand large and looping and growing smaller and tighter toward the close of each page, as though the man had written the first lines bravely and the last ones with his courage failing. This one. She turned it to the light. Listen, I have done my son a wrong he does not yet know of, and I will not go to my account having left it standing. The bargain, with V, is repudiated by me wholly. My boy shall marry where his own heart sends him, debt or no debt, and I will find the money another way or die owing it honestly. She looked up. He says it himself, Your Grace, in the words your enemy least wants spoken. We need invent nothing. We need only let your father be heard. My father. The Duke took the page from her, and his hand was not quite steady on it, and Clara had the wit to look away to the candle while he read his father's failing courage in his father's failing hand. He never said one word of this to me. 11 months, and 100 creditors counted in the dark, and he could not say 4 sentences of it to my face. Men of his sort cannot, the Dowager said, say to a living son what they can write to an attorney. It is not love that fails them. It is the looking. She laid her old hand briefly over her son's. He loved you badly and late, and in writing. It is a poor inheritance. But it is, this once, a useful one. They made fair copies until past the turn of the night. Clara's governess hand, neat and clear and schooled to be read by children, set down 3 faithful copies of the 2 strongest letters, and the Duke sanded each one, and the Dowager named, from memory, the 4 people in London through whose drawing rooms a thing could be sent at 9 in the morning and known in 40 by noon. Lady Sefton, who held a voucher in one hand and a whole season's reputations in the other. The Countess of Drax, who had loved the late Duke once, long ago, and would weep over his repentance, and repeat it weeping. Old Mr. Calloway, at the bow window of his club, who had never kept a confidence in 60 years, and was loved for it. And the editor of the Court Journal, who would print, for the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne, and an exclusive, very nearly anything she pleased. By 2 o'clock tomorrow, the Dowager said, sealing the last with her own ring, pressing the martlet down into the soft wax so the footless bird flew once more, the whole of the town will know that my husband repented his bargain on his way out of the world. And when Sir Harford Vane stands up to read his settlement aloud, he will be reading the contract a dying gentleman tore up, and every soul in the room will already know it was torn. She set the letter on the pile. He will not look like a man collecting a debt. He will look like a creditor robbing a grave. And that, Clara Hale, is a thing his coal money cannot buy him out of. Clara found the Duke an hour before dawn, alone in the cold library, standing at the half-shuttered window, where a grey edge of light had begun to come up over the plane tree in the square. The candles had guttered to stubs. The house slept around them, vast and breathing, and the air had the dead low chill of the hour when summer forgets itself and the stone remembers winter. You should rest, she said from the doorway. You've a long day to be a duke in. So should you. You have a longer one to be the cause of it all. He did not turn from the glass. Come here a moment. Look. She crossed the cold floor and stood beside him, and below in the grey square a single early cart was going by, the horse's breath smoking, a man asleep on the seat with the reins loose in his fist, and the white summer stocks in the window boxes hung heavy with dew that the coming sun had not yet found. I stood at this window yesterday, the Duke said, and watched a girl in twine boots walk my mother to my door, and I thought, here is the next wolf. I have stood at this window every morning for 11 months looking for wolves. It is a tiring way to keep a house. He turned his head, and in the grey light the closed sky had gone clean out of his eyes, and what was left was only tired and young and, for the first time, unguarded. You called my mother an old woman to her face and missed her gloves entirely. Do you know? That is the most honest thing that has happened in this house since they buried my father. I did not know what to do with it. I am not certain I do yet. You did the right thing in the end, Clara said. You threw the table over. You threw it. I only let it fall. He was quiet a moment. Then, very lightly, with the ghost of the dust-dry voice, I find I am to be ruined by Friday, in every coffee house from here to Cornhill. And I have not slept. And I have a baronet's daughter who would gladly see me boiled. And I am standing at a cold window at dawn feeling, against all sense, better than I have felt since the spring. I should like an explanation, Miss Hale. You appear to be the cause of every disordered thing in my life since noon yesterday. You may as well account for this one too. Clara looked at him in the grey light, at the razor-shadowed jaw and the rinsed grey eyes and the broad shoulders that the long night had at last let down, and felt the floor of the morning shift very slightly beneath her, the way the cobbles had shifted, the way the green-lit afternoon had tilted on its axis. I haven't an explanation, she said. Only, it is easier to breathe, I find, on the days you stop guarding the thing and let it be seen instead. I learnt that in a charity house, where there was nothing of mine worth guarding, and so I gave up guarding early. You've been at it 11 months. It must be a great relief to set it down. His hand moved, then, not far, only along the cold sill, until the side of it rested against the side of hers, warm where everything else in the room was cold, and neither of them looked at it, and neither of them moved it away. Below, the early sun found the dew on the white stocks all at once, and set the whole window box blazing. Yes, the Duke said. A great relief. Sir Harford Vane came back at 4 the next afternoon, and he came in his carriage this time, with his crest new painted on the door, and Augusta beside him in saffron silk, and a thin man in black at his shoulder, carrying a flat leather case. The attorney, Clara thought, or the man who would witness the word given. The footman in midnight livery let them up, and the cold library received them, and this time the half-shutters were thrown wide, so that the late summer light came down golden across the long dark table, and there was nowhere in the room to keep a thing hidden. The Duke stood at the head of the table as before, but the Dowager stood at his right hand now, in grey silk and her good gloves, every inch the Duchess she had spent yesterday refusing to be, and Clara stood at his left, and on the table before them, plain and open and unsealed, lay the 2 letters in the late Duke's failing hand. Sir Harford saw them. Clara watched him see them. The florid colour did not change in his heavy, handsome face, but his small, shrewd eyes went still, and the case-bearer behind him shifted his weight, and somewhere in the house a clock let 3 quick beats fall into the silence. Ashbourne. Vane's voice was easy yet, but the ease had gone thin over the top of it, like ice gone grey at the edges. You have had a busy morning? My man tells me the court journal is to carry a very pretty story tomorrow about a repentant duke, and Lady Sefton was heard at her own breakfast table to call my dealings grave robbery. He set his hat down on the dark wood. You think you have been clever. I think, the Duke said, that I have been honest, which I'm told comes to nearly the same thing, and is a great deal cheaper to keep up. He did not raise his voice. Read your settlement, Vane. Stand up in any room in London and read it. The room will already know my father tore it up on his way out of the world. You will not be a man owed a marriage. You will be a man who held a gentleman to a bargain that gentleman repudiated in writing. And you have spent 15 years and a coalfield's worth of money buying your way into rooms that will close to you the moment that word is said. A beat. I had it from your own mouth, sir. You fear shame more than law. I have given the ton your shame to read with their chocolate. There is nothing in your leather case that can take it back. Sir Harford was silent. The case-bearer behind him drew out, at a small motion of the baronet's fat hand, a single folded paper, heavy with an old red seal. The original. Clara knew it at once. The true settlement.
the late Duke's own hand and his own martlet, and laid it on the golden table. And the whole circle of 2 days closed upon that square of paper, as upon a drawn knife. "Then I will ruin the girl," Vane said softly, "and let the ruin of her be the story instead. A penniless nobody, no character, no people, taken up by a duchess off the street in a single morning, sleeping under a duke's roof by night. I need not even lie, Ashbourne. I need only let the town wonder aloud what she is to you. By the time they have done wondering, your honest little tale will be drowned in a dirtier one, and your mother's name with it." He turned his small eyes on Clara, and the grease came back into his smile. "I told you I am a careful man, Miss Hale. I have spent the morning inquiring after you, very particularly, and there is so very much in a life like yours that a careful Nan can make useful." "Papa!" The word came from Augusta, and it came small and strange. Not the carrying, sweet voice of the pavement, but a flat, low thing, and every head in the room turned to her. She had gone to the window while her father spoke. Clara had marked her drift there, and had thought it sulks. But the girl stood now in the wide, gold light, with her back half to the room, and her gloved hands gripping each other at her waist. And on her beautiful face was an expression Clara had not seen there before, and could not at first read. Not temper, not malice, but a kind of sick clarity. The look of someone who has caught sight of her own reflection in a shop glass when she did not expect it, and does not like what she has seen. "Hush, child," Sir Harford said. "I am working. You are trading me." Augusta turned. The blotched scarlet was climbing her throat, but her chin was up, and her eyes, Clara saw with a small shock, were bright with a thing that was not rage at all. "You have stood in this room twice now, Papa, and bargained for a husband who will not look at me, with a paper a man tore up sooner than be bound to me. And now you mean to sweeten it by ruining her, a sewing girl in mended boots, as though that will make him want me. As though anyone could be made to want me by your paper." Her voice cracked clean across. "I was glad when she insulted me in the street. Do you know that? For one moment I was glad, because at least she saw me. At least she spoke to me as a person, and not a clause. You have never once asked me whether I wished to marry the Duke of Ashbourne. You asked the price. You always ask only the price." The cold gold room had gone very still. "Augusta," Sir Harford's voice had dropped to something dangerous. "You will sit down." "I will not." The girl was weeping now, openly, ruinously, the way the very young weep, with no art in it at all, and it stripped the cruelty off her face entirely, and left only what had been under it the whole time, which was a lonely child dressed in saffron silk and used like a coin. "I will not have him. Not bought, not begged, not by your paper or his pity. I had rather be a season behind in my bonnets for the rest of my life than spend one day married to a man my own father had to purchase for me." She dragged off one glove and pressed the back of her bare hand to her mouth. "Tear up your settlement yourself, Papa, since His Grace's father had the decency to do it first. I release him. There, it is done. And I have done it. And you cannot unsay it for me, because for once in my life I have said a true thing in a room full of people, and they have all heard." Sir Harford Vane stood in the wreck of his afternoon, with his daughter weeping into her bare hand, and his settlement lying open and worthless in the gold light, and Clara watched the careful man do, at last, the only sum left to him, and find it did not come right, and find there was no further turn of the screw to take, because the screw had broken in his hand. He took up the original settlement from the table. For one moment Clara thought he would tear it himself, and make of the gesture some last shred of dignity. He did not. He folded it once more, slowly, and put it away inside his new coat, and when he looked up his heavy, handsome face, had aged 10 years in as many seconds. "You have all of you," he said, "made me a small man this afternoon,
I shall not forget it. You made yourself small, the Dowager Duchess said, the day you thought a child was a thing you could spend. Take her home, Sir Harford, and be kinder to her than you have been, because she has just shown more courage in this room than you have shown in your whole climbing life. And if you have any sense at all left under your vanity, you will go down on your knees tonight and thank her for releasing you from a bargain that would have shamed your house far longer than any letter of mine. She inclined her head, precise and final. Good afternoon. My footmen will see you out. They are very good at it. Augusta went to the door. At the threshold she stopped and turned, and for one strange beat, she and Clara looked at one another across the gold and the dust. The baronet's daughter and the governess of no character, and something passed between them that was not friendship and was not forgiveness, but was, perhaps, a kind of recognition. Two girls who had each been the thing thrown in. Your boots, Augusta said unsteadily, are honester than my silk. I see that now. I am sorry for the street. And then, with a flash of the old fire that was somehow, now, almost likeable. But my bonnet was not a season behind. It was the very newest. You only said it to wound me, and it landed, and I have hated you for it for a day and a half, and I shall probably go on hating you a little, because it is restful. Good afternoon, Miss Hale. She was gone in a rustle of saffron, after her ruined father, down through the cool house and out the great black door into the warm, bright street, and the door closed below with the soft sound of a book shut on a finished chapter. The library held its breath. Then, the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne sat down rather suddenly in the nearest chair, and pressed her good glove to her mouth, and Clara realized with a lurch that the old woman was not weeping, but laughing, helplessly, soundlessly, the way one laughs when a thing one has dreaded for 11 months simply walks out the door of its own accord. Oh, the Dowager managed at last. Oh, that child. Did you hear her? It was the very newest bonnet. I could kiss her odious little head. Julian, Julian, do sit down before you fall down. You have not slept, and you have just been jilted in your own library by a girl you never proposed to, which I believe is a thing that has not happened to a Duke of Ashbourne in 200 years. Your grandmother would have laughed for a week. But the Duke did not sit down. He had come round the long table, and he stood before Clara in the wide gold light, with the worthless settlement gone, and the open letters lying between them, and the tiredness was on him still, but under it, breaking through it, was the thing Clara had watched almost arrive a dozen times now, the smile he never permitted himself the expense of, and this time he permitted it, and it changed his whole hard young face the way his mother's laugh had changed hers on the cobbles, made it suddenly, startlingly, the face of the man he might have been before the wolves. It is over, he said. You did that. You walked into my mother's market yesterday with a basket of nothing and 11 shillings, and you have ended in a single day a thing that has had its hand round this family's throat since before my father was taken from us. He shook his head slowly. I do not know what to do with you, Clara Hale. I have spent 2 days trying to make the sum come out, and it will not, and I find I have stopped wanting it to. You owe me nothing, Clara said. Her voice was not steady. She had stopped expecting it to be. I told you that in the street, and I'll tell you here. I'd have done it for anyone. I didn't know who any of you were. No, he took her hand, the work rough one, the one that had set down the basket and picked up the letters and lain warm against his on the cold sill at dawn, and held it in both of his, and the golden light lay over them, and did not need to soften anything now, for there was nothing left in his face to soften. You didn't know. That is rather the whole of it. As my mother says, you came toward us when everyone else moved away, before you knew there was anything to be got by it, and I have been so long among people who only ever come toward me for what is to be got, but I had forgotten the other kind of person existed. His thumb moved across her knuckles, once, the way an old woman's thumb had moved across a sealed letter that he could not see. Stay. Not as the morning's accident. Not as my mother's project, though God knows she has decided to keep you, and I have learnt the cost of arguing with her. Stay, because I am asking you to, for myself, in my own voice, having given my word to no one, and being free at last to give it where my own heart sends me. Which is, my father wrote, the only honest way a man may give it at all. Clara looked up at him, and the cold library that smelled of leather and dust and the long-shut summer seemed all at once full of light and the clove-sweet breath of the stocks from the open window, and she understood that the thing she had spent 4 charity house years learning to keep covered did not, after all, need covering here. "I love you," she said, because she had never in her life learned the art of saying a true thing slantwise, and she was too tired and too happy to begin now. I think I began to, at the window, when you stopped guarding the thing and let it be seen. I have nothing, Your Grace. No character, no people, 11 shillings and a temper I've badly overspent. You should know exactly what you're keeping." "I am keeping," said the Duke of Ashbourne, "the only person in London this summer with the wit to tell a baronet's daughter the truth about her bonnet, and a duke the truth about his pride. I am told it is a poor bargain. I find I do not care for the opinion of careful men," and he bent his head and kissed her, there in the gold light with his mother frankly watching, and wiping her eyes, and not pretending otherwise. A kiss as plain and as honest as everything else that had passed between them. Warm where the room was cool, certain where the morning had been all chance. "Finally," said the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne to the ceiling, "I went to that dreadful market to fetch flour, and I have come home with a daughter instead. It is by some distance the best morning's marketing I have done in 40 years, and I shall be insufferable about it for the rest of my life, and neither of you shall stop me." They were married quietly in the autumn, when the plane tree in the square had begun to drop its coins of gold for true onto the swept stone, and the court journal, which had carried, in the end, a very pretty story about a repentant duke and the honest girl who helped his mother home, sent a man to stand in the cold to watch the carriages, and went away with nothing improper to print at all, which disappointed it greatly. The story the town told instead was the one the Dowager told best, over and over, at every dinner that would have her, how she had gone out plain to the market on a hot August morning, against her son's every wish, and been knocked into the gutter for her trouble, and had only one soul in the whole grasping city move toward her instead of away. A penniless governess in twine mended boots, who did not know a duchess from a discarded housekeeper, and would not have cared if she had. And on a bright morning the next summer, in the kitchen of the great pale house in Mount Street, for the new Duchess of Ashbourne could not be kept out of her own kitchen, to the despair of the staff and the delight of her husband, Clara stood with her sleeves pushed up and her hands deep in bread dough, the warm yeasty smell of it rising round her, the August sun coming gold through the window, and a paper of best flour open at her elbow, bought and paid for, and spilling not one grain. "You have flour," said the Duke from the doorway, "on your nose, in your hair, and across what I am fairly certain was a clean apron when you began. You look, if I may say so, exactly like a discarded housekeeper who has come down in the world." Clara laughed and flicked a pinch of flour at him across the warm kitchen, and it caught the gold light and hung there a moment like the dust that had bloomed around an old woman's skirts on the cobbles a year and a lifetime ago. "Then you'd best take my arm," she said, "and see me safely home, before I'm knocked down twice in one morning." "My darling," said the Duke of Ashbourne, crossing the warm flagstones to do exactly that, "you are home," and he took her floured hand in both of his. The way he had taken it in the cold gold light of the library, the way an old woman's thumb had once moved across a sealed letter she had walked the worst streets in London to carry home, and outside the open window the white summer stocks breathed their clove-sweet scent into the bright still air, and the bells of a church somewhere east of them rang the half-hour into the thick gold summer, and nobody, that morning, moved away. If this story warmed you even half as much as that kitchen, stay a moment by the fire with me. Tell me in the comments which line you'd have flung the flour over, and if you've ever crossed a street towards someone the rest of the world was walking away from. I'd love to hear it. Subscribe and keep the lantern lit for the next tale. There's always tea on, and the door's never locked. Until then, Good night, and be kind to the old women in the market. You never quite know whose mother you're helping home.